The year was 1924. The Russian Revolution had become less than a revolution, and more of a prolonged public execution. The Soviet government, if it could still be called a government, had been reduced to Petrograd and several nearby provinces, and an increasingly unrealistic belief that things may somehow improve. The front lines were collapsing, entire armies had disappeared, and the economy had shattered, while Soviet resistance was also hanging by a thread. The White Armies controlled most of Russia. Denikin dominated the south, and Kolchak ruled the east, with anti-Bolshevik forces stretching around the entire country, which was bad enough on its own, but unfortunately, there was also Britain. Now, Britain was technically my ally, but rather than calmly observing Russia's descent into societal collapse, Britain made the bold strategic decision to actively make the situation worse. What should have been a temporary civil war became a war of attrition and survival. A war expected to last months lasted 7 years. The Soviet position became increasingly desperate. Entire offensives failed, front lines imploded, and at the lowest point, the Soviets controlled only northwestern Russia. And for a moment, it genuinely looked over. Then, against all logic, the White Armies began fighting each other. After years of unity against the Bolsheviks, they believed the Bolsheviks were done. Kolchak's Russian state invaded Denikin's army in the south. When these cracks began to form, an opportunity appeared. Denikin's forces were crushed. Western Russia was reclaimed. Kolchak's Russian state collapsed. The Baltics, Belarus, Ukraine, Poland, and the Caucasus quickly fell under Soviet control. And by 1926, after 7 years of civil war, the Soviet Union survived and came out better. The Russian Empire, for the first time in a long time, was trying to hold itself together. The previous years had not been kind to Russia. The Russo-Japanese War had ended in humiliation. The defeat at Tsushima had destroyed a fleet that took months to send and minutes to lose. And for a brief moment, it looked like the empire might begin to slow decline into irrelevance. But by 1910, something was changing. The chaos of 1905 had been contained. Revolutionary pressure had cooled, and the empire still stood. Not stable, but functional. At least on the surface. The Russian Empire remained vast, stretching across Europe and Asia, home to millions of soldiers, workers, and civilians. Governance, however, was another matter, because Russia was not a unified machine. It was an agricultural empire. In practice, this meant most of the country still relied on farming rather than industry, which severely limited industrial expansion. Production lagged behind its rivals, and modernization was something Russia was still catching up to. Infrastructure made the problem worse. The empire was enormous, so large that connecting it efficiently was almost impossible. The military reflected on this imbalance. Russia had manpower, more than enough manpower, but manpower alone does not win wars. Equipment was uneven, logistics were inconsistent, and modernization had not reached the officer corps. Still, by 1910, the empire was not collapsing. It was rebuilding. Strikes still existed, political tension still simmered, and in the memory of defeat had not disappeared. But for the first time in years, Russia looked like it might be preparing for something greater. Something stable, something functional. Something that could finally break Russia's long streak of humiliation and defeat. After 1910, Russia would begin a period of rapid modernization under Nicholas II, attempting to reshape the empire into a true industrial and military power, capable of standing up to Germany and the dual monarchy. By 1910, Russia began to rebuild. Under Nicholas II, the empire finally began preparing for the future, and increasingly, that future looked like war. The first step came through diplomacy. The St. Petersburg military expedition brought Russia and France into closer military cooperation. The Entente began minor research sharing between themselves. At the same time, Russia began pursuing motorization. Research into armored vehicles began, a vehicle that could hopefully turn the tide of whatever war Russia faced. The army quickly became the priority. The Great Program strengthened military production. At the same time, the Fourth Duma was convened. Russia immediately reassured France of its commitment to the Entente. Strikes were crushed, political stability slowly returned, and Russia increasingly embraced its role as the protector of Orthodox Christians, which conveniently gave the empire an excuse to eye up Ottoman Armenia. Military reform followed. 5 army groups were established. 4 positioned along the western frontier against Germany and Austria-Hungary. The 5th, the Caucasus Army, prepared for conflict against the Ottomans should it become necessary. Russia had manpower, but this time, it also had other factors. Rather than endlessly expanding the army, recruitment slowed, equipment stockpiles recovered, and the entire military began intensive training. At home, industrialization accelerated. Factories spread deeper into Russia, railways modernized. British investment entered the economy. Oil production expanded, and despite Russia's agrarian limits, the empire was finally beginning to industrialize at speed. Then the Balkans exploded. Russia supported the Balkan League against the Ottomans, and even when Bulgaria turned against Serbia and Greece, Russia still backed the Balkan League, even quietly encouraging Romania to intervene. The Ottomans attempted to regain lost territory, and quickly discovered that Russia had opinions about it. By 1914, Russia looked transformed. The army had modernized, industry expanded, infrastructure improved. The empire projected strength abroad, and for the first time in years, Russia looked almost ready. Not fully ready, but it was close. And just as it was about to finish, peace in Europe ended. (1914). After 4 years of reform, Russia finally entered the war it had spent years preparing for. Surprisingly, things went well, at least initially. German and Austrian offensives stalled almost immediately. Across the Eastern Front, the Central Powers struggled to make meaningful progress. The long-awaited war became a stalemate, and seeing opportunity, Russia struck first. Offensives launched into East Prussia and Galicia. Memel was captured, territory was gained, but in the broader offensives were failed to achieve a decisive breakthrough. Then the Germans and Austrians stopped disagreeing for approximately 5 minutes, and immediately became much more dangerous. Joint Austro-German offensives smashed through Russian Poland. The line broke, and Russia was forced into retreat. A retreat that surprisingly went better than expected. Most divisions escaped encirclement, only a handful were lost. Seeing Russia under pressure, the Ottoman Empire entered the war with a Black Sea raid. This went poorly for them. Back in Europe, Germany shifted focus westward, leaving Austria-Hungary to continue the struggle largely alone. Austria advanced into Bessarabia. The offensive stalled. What followed became a brutal back-and-forth struggle. Russian offensives met Austrian counterattacks. Territory changed hands repeatedly. Neither side gained defensive momentum, until eventually, the line broke. Austrian forces in Bessarabia were encircled. Entire formations collapsed, and Russian armies surged forward, pushing Austria dangerously close to its own borders. For the first time since the war began, Russia achieved a genuine victory. Then, encouraged by Russian success against Austria-Hungary, Romania joined on the side of the Entente. This decision lasted poorly. Romania was quickly overwhelmed. Russian reinforcements became necessary. Conscription expanded, and pressure began mounting on an already strained front. Dobruja was reclaimed. Russian forces pushed deeper into Austrian territory, and for a brief moment, victory felt possible. Then Germany remembered the Eastern Front existed. German offensives resumed. Latvia collapsed. Riga fell. And suddenly, everything began going wrong. The Central Powers advanced rapidly. With Riga gone, Estonia fell. Minsk was captured. And eventually, the Tsar fell. The April Revolution overthrew Nicholas II. The monarchy collapsed, and power shifted to a democratic government promising victory, at exactly the moment victory stopped existing.
Kiev fell. The Russian army retreated to Dnipro. And yet hope remained. The Americans entered the war. On the Western Front, German armies were pushed back towards the Rhine. After years of war, it finally seemed like the end was near. Russia had suffered, but survived. The empire had bent, but was not broken. And just as victory appeared possible, the river turned red. (1917). The Republic was dead. The provisional government was gone. In Petrograd, the Soviets had seized power. The Winter Palace had been completely stormed. It appeared the revolution had fully succeeded. Unfortunately, the revolution had only conquered Petrograd and Moscow. And while the Soviets briefly continued the war against Germany, it quickly became obvious that they were outmatched. Petrograd fell. The Germans continued advancing, and the Bolsheviks signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. Russia was out of the Great War, and now it could focus on tearing itself apart. Across the country, breakaway governments emerged. Soviet forces immediately moved to restore order, and at first, this seemed manageable. The breakaway states were isolated, and the Red Army was growing. And victory appeared inevitable. Then the Volunteer Army appeared. Battle after battle was lost. The Don Republic aligned with them, and their territory expanded. Then, everything became worse. The Czechoslovak Legion revolted across the Trans-Siberian Railway. White governments appeared throughout Siberia. Entire sections of Russia fell under anti-Bolshevik control. And just within a few short months, the situation became absolutely dire. After years of civil war, the Soviet positions had been pushed back behind Moscow. Now, with Petrograd being the last major city of the Bolsheviks, it seemed defeat was inevitable. Until a miracle occurred. The two major white armies of Kolchak and Denikin began to fight each other. This left the Soviet front open to a counterattack. The time had come to destroy the Southern Russian army.
Неулыбающийся маршал свел народные дела. Всех полководцев был он строже, пред ним дрожал коварный враг. И мы его боялись тоже, теперь, признаюсь, было так. Пусть дойдет до внуков песня деда, о герое песни, о Жужуках и победа, о Жужуках и победа, о Жужуках и победа.
After officially defeating Denikin's army of the south, we had only one opponent left, Kolchak and his Russian state in Siberia. But they were no threat to us. They had grown so weak and us so strong that it was guaranteed that we would defeat them in a matter of time. So we looked around us. The Caucasus, Poland, the Baltics would now be folded back into our zone. After conquering Eastern Europe and most of the countries that had left us during the Civil War, we could finally turn our attention to finishing the Russian state. And now that's done, the underdog had won. The Soviet Union had survived, and somehow emerged larger than it had before. Resistance was crushed, the country began rebuilding, and for the first time, Russia was finally at peace. And the next chapter was only beginning.